Hello, everyone. Welcome to our virtual event. This is the ABCs of Parking Reform, an event by the Parking Reform Network. So, in this event, led by our President Tony Jordan, he is going to share the basics of this whole movement. So, this is a great event for those of you who are new to this whole world of the parking reform and to understand better how this affects other areas of our lifestyle. This is a really good event for that. And it's also good for new members. So if there are new members here, yay. So happy that you joined to this event. Now I'm going to introduce Tony Jordan. Tony Jordan stumbled into parking reform in 2010 and never climbed back out. What began as a curiosity about a zoning footnote turned into a full-time mission to help communities rethink how they use space and how cities are built for. He co-founded the Parking Reform Network in 2019 and now leads PRN's national work supporting advocates, planners, and public officials working to change outdated parking policies. Tony and his family live car-free in Portland, Oregon. So with this all said, that's right now all for me. So let's welcome Tony Jordan, and I'm going to stop sharing. Tony, floor is yours.
Thanks. It's weird being introduced to my own organization's event a little bit, but I'm glad to be here and be with you. Thanks everyone for coming. I was excited to see a bunch of names of folks that I hadn't necessarily met. I've given this presentation before. This is the first time we're hoping to do this kind of thing quarterly, probably. And so if you've seen my presentation before, there will be some similarities. I've reworked it a bit, and I would very much look forward to your feedback afterwards. We can share my email in the chat, and you can just send it directly to me if you like, so we can keep improving this. But we're going to talk about kind of the ABCs, the basics of parking reform here. And the core thing we have to understand is that parking is a problem, right? And if you ask your average person, what is the problem with parking? They're probably going to tell you that they don't like to pay for it. It costs too much to pay for it, and that there's not enough where they want. And one of the core arguments here we're going to start with is that that's exactly the opposite. There's too much parking, and it's too cheap to pay to use. And that seems counterintuitive, but you can look all around and see how much parking is bundled into rents, how much sprawl there is, and understand that parking actually is a big problem. And there's some core issues with how we built parking and just intrinsic in parking that we need to think about. The first is that parking is expensive. It costs a lot to build a parking space. These numbers are not for every use, but these are realistic numbers from around the country. A surface parking space costs between, the low single digits, mid single digits to high double digits. I mean, to low double digits in thousands of dollars to build, $10,000 to build a surface parking space. This doesn't include the cost of land. This doesn't include maintenance. This is just to build a parking space. An above ground parking space is going to cost in the tens of thousands of dollars, 30, 40, $50,000. It can be even more. There's no limit to how much a parking space can cost. And if you want to go below ground, it depends on how deep you're going, but it's 50 to 100% or more to build below ground than it is to go above ground. This is important because when you're building something, $1,000 in construction cost is $10 in rent roughly that you need to collect to make it work. So this $40,000 parking space you might be building with an apartment requires $400 a month for someone to pay. They have that's money that's got to get paid to make things pencil out. If you're not paying it as a separate line item, it's being bundled into your costs. These are real money. It's real money. How we choose to spend money is absolutely real. In Stamford, Connecticut, they built a parking garage at the train station. There's about 900 cars that can park in this garage, and it costs $90 million. So it costs $88,000 roughly in this garage to park a car so someone can take a train. In the same city, there's a apartment complex called the Stamford Apartments, the Franklin Apartments. This apartment complex was built with $9 million in investment. It's a permanently, deeply affordable complex with no ongoing subsidy needed. The rents pay for the ongoing access. there's about 120 people that can live in this apartment building. It's not 120 apartments, but you can house a person in Stamford, Connecticut for the same cost that you can build a parking space, and that's a problem. Sorry, I got to move something out. I'm being distracted by something. Okay, great. Um, Parking takes up a lot of space too. A parking space takes up 300 to 400 square feet per stall. So when we look at how that impacts our urban environment, it's pretty clear. If you're requiring more than one parking space for 300 square feet of building, which is a pretty common requirement, you can see through this graphic from Pay Paradise, the parking lot is going to be larger than the building it serves. And when we have some land uses like restaurants or bars, often the amount of parking that the city is requiring is multiple times larger than the building that it's serving. So it restricts how we can use our land to best suit our goals. This is reflected if you can look anytime you see a slide like this that I show, it's the same size of the area in one slide is the same area as the other one. So this is Bentonville, Arkansas, and you can see the downtown square that was built before parking mandates existed, and a newer commercial development afterwards. And you can see this the human scale versus the automobile scale, right? Like you can't build this compact form if you're requiring or building a bunch of parking. This is from College Park, Texas. Again, same area in both photos. Old little strip, about 10 businesses with a bunch of homes nearby. It's not the prettiest, most walkable scene, but it gets the job done. There's a little restaurant in the corner where I went a couple times when I was visiting there. A couple blocks away, you have a more modern development, right? Which is not pedestrian oriented. It's everything surrounded by this asphalt. There's not the same number of people who can live nearby. It's not the same. And when it comes to housing, it's pretty clear, especially multifamily housing. It's pretty common to require 1.5 to 2 parking spaces per apartment in the United States. If a parking space takes up 300 to 400 square feet and you're requiring 1.5 to 2 of them, it's pretty easy to see how you can end up requiring more parking than housing, and we do. So we've ended up with a situation where we have parking is extremely underpriced and oversupplied in the United States. We know parking's not free, but more than 90, probably much more. I'm being conservative here based on the data I could find. More than 90% of car trips in the United States end in free parking. So the parking's not free to build, but it's free to use for the person who's there. It's being bundled in. We rarely see the cost of parking reflected in the things we buy. If you go to a grocery store or Costco, clearly the parking's not free, but it's not listed anywhere on your receipt. It's being bundled in and you're paying for it whether you use it or not. We built so much parking in the United States that when we surveyed, the QR code here, we have it on our website. We surveyed 100 cities in the United States and mapped their city centers for how much of it was parking. And about 20 to 25% of your average US city, downtown core, the lot is, 25% of those lots are parking lots or parking garages. So we're devoting all this space to automobile storage as opposed to, businesses, housing, et cetera. And that's a best case scenario. When you think about that picture from Bentonville, the newer developments, the downtowns are usually pretty old. They're more compact. Newer development is going to be even worse. This is a map from Urban 3. They're a partner organization or a business that supports us supports these ideas in North Carolina. They map cities, and so they map Memphis, Tennessee, and you can see you look at the whole area of Memphis. There's a lot of other land that's like open space, parks, etc., just unbuilt stuff. But the city itself is mainly 3 land uses: it's buildings, parking, and road. And when you add it up in Memphis, and this is not super uncommon in the United States, the number one land use that's not open space is parking. There's 1,133 square feet of building for every person in Memphis, and there's 1,172 square feet of parking for people in Memphis. But the value of the city, the value of the city is all in the buildings. The value that pays taxes, et cetera, is in the city, is in the buildings and not in the parking. This is even more stark when you look at it at a graph like this, where you can see the buildings are what are worth something, but we have so much parking in our cities, it takes up as much space as the buildings. So how do we get out of this mess, right? Well, we followed the Shoup doctrine. Professor Shoup was a professor at UCLA. He passed away last year, but he kind of kicked off this whole movement, and he came up with three ideas after he saw how much the damage we were having by underpriced and oversupplied and over required parking. And he said, get rid of the get rid of the rules that require parking. Price your curbs, manage curbs with pricing. There's a goal of 85% occupancy. We'll talk about that in a second. And use the money that you raise from parking if you are charging to reduce car dependency or to improve the area that you're charging for. Parking requirements, if you're not familiar with them, and I'm going to go more in this in a second, are made up. So that's why you want to get rid of them, right? This is from the 1950s, as these requirements are getting put in place. You had architects saying, we don't know no one can agree how much parking there should be for a shopping center. We just guess a number and it's either too many or not enough. So anytime you have a number, the city's saying we need this many spaces, it's either going to be too many spaces or not enough spaces. So the rule doesn't serve anything. What the city can do to help make sure that enough parking is built is manage the parking that they own. Cities should mind their own businesses mind their own business when it comes to parking. They should not tell a developer or a tenant or a entrepreneur or a customer how much parking they need. The city can manage the asset that it has, the parking on the street. And it can do that very simply using economics. They monitor the number of parking spaces and the utilization. And if there is a lot of parking, then they either don't charge or maybe they even turn that parking into something else or they encourage development in the area. And if there are a lot of people parking in the space, you raise the price until you have roughly a space or two open on every block face. This is performance parking. And so it means that someone can find a space, but they have to pay for it. And why do we do that? Well, one, it's the lowest fair price. The goal of the city is not to make money on this necessarily. It's to say, we want people to be able to access an area. So we're going to set the price to the lowest price that leads to a space available. This is not a political policy. It's data-driven and responsive. Politicians, city council does not know how much parking should cost, and they shouldn't be making that decision. It should be based on a policy of access or performance. This increases turnover and access, which means that businesses that are afraid to charge for parking shouldn't be if they have, because the number of cars, the number of parking spaces, you want a high utilization of the parking spaces, which means customers can come in. It also provides more access for just general people to come by. So you're not trying to drive business away. It's important to spend any money you make on parking wisely. You don't want to just go into a black hole. It's important to spend the money to improve access to an area and also to show people that the money is being spent wisely. So great things are sidewalks and crosswalk repairs, trash pickup, better lighting so that customers and employees are comfortable walking a little farther in. You can buy transit passes for employees or low-income residents. You can build bus lanes, bike shelters. There's a lot of things you could do with this money. Just make sure you're not becoming dependent on it. We have a whole guidebook on this, parking benefit guide for activists. It's not just for activists, it's a guide for anyone kind of, that we have available on our website and as a PDF. We can happily answer questions or help you with that in the future. So I've detailed some of the problems we have with parking, and I've detailed some potential solutions. And you might be asking, Tony, is this even possible? Can we actually do this? And yes, we can. In 2020, there were 18 North American cities, 15 in the United States that had gotten rid of parking requirements entirely for all their uses citywide. As of a couple weeks ago, there's at least 107 just in the US. This is a policy that is gaining momentum. It works. These are cities in cold places and hot places, blue states, red states, cities with no transit, city with great transit, cities, well, to the extent that we have great transit in the United States, cities with, small cities and big cities. This is all on a map we have on our website, the parking reform map. Maybe Daniel can put a link in, and you can filter, and this is just cities that have gotten rid of all their parking requirements entirely. There are thousands of cities that have reduced or eliminated them for areas of their city. It's happening statewide too. Since 2019, 26 states have introduced parking reform legislation. I think we're tracking right now something like 7 or 8 statewide bills just this session, some of which, including North Carolina, would eliminate parking requirements entirely in the whole state. So this is moving very fast. Parking reform is possible, especially eliminating parking mandates. Still trying to figure out exactly how to get cities to charge for parking more readily, but the mandates as possible. And if it's not happening in your city, we can help you. The main way I think that I want to impart on how to get reforms done and how to push for eliminating parking requirements is to just make people understand how stupid the requirements are and the damage that they cause. So we talked about how damaging parking is in general, and the key driver to inflicting that damage is requiring excess amounts of parking in your city. These numbers are made up. And you can demonstrate this by a simple survey, and I'm going to show you one. I gave a talk in the capital region of Connecticut. I surveyed there's about 30 cities within a 30-mile square, right? 30 by 30 by 30 by 30 roughly. And I looked up every zoning code and put it in a big document. And then I said I wanted to build a bowling alley in Connecticut. So if I wanted to build a bowling alley in Ellington, Connecticut, I would have to build 2 parking spaces per alley is lane in this case. So 2 parking spaces per lane. But if I wanted to build in West Hartford, I'd have to build 8 parking spaces per lane. So I have to build 4 times as much parking in West Hartford than in Ellington. And that's weird because why, like, do people carpool more in Ellington? I don't really understand. But it gets even kookier because I found every single number in between 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And I found this not just in this capital region, Connecticut. I don't always find every number in between, but you will survey the cities within about 30 miles of wherever you live, and you will probably find a spread like this. Maybe you don't want to build a bowling alley. Maybe you want to build a funeral home. Well, in Willington, you only need 5 parking spaces per chapel, but in Farmington, you need 40. That's 8 times as many parking spaces. Why? No one knows. Maybe you don't want to go by chapel. These are real requirements in that same 30 by 30 square, 1 per 25 square feet in Wethersfield, which is a lot of parking, versus 1 per 200 in Mansfield. 8 times as much parking required in Wethersfield than in Mansfield. Why? No one knows. These were set decades ago and they haven't been changed. The most extreme parking requirement I may have ever seen is in Cerritos, California, where they require 5 parking spaces per 25 square feet in a funeral home. That means, based on the calculations of the square footage, if you wanted to build a funeral home in Cerritos, California, you would need a parking lot that was 60 times bigger than the funeral home. Bonkers. A lot of these requirements aren't used. They don't make any sense. This is North Carolina. I found at least 3 cities that have parking requirements for drive-in movie theaters. Why would you need a parking space for a parking space? Like, you can't have a drive-in movie theater without having the parking spaces, but these are in the zoning codes telling people things that they never need. I only have a couple more of these. I just can't stop, guys. Gilbert, Arizona, haunted house parking requirements. Why so specific? Why 1 stall per 100 square feet? What was the story behind this? Carver, Massachusetts, cemetery, 1 per 8 occupants of the cemetery. I guess they're carpooling. I'm not sure. The key to a lot of these is you look at a land use like a cemetery, and no one's built a cemetery in Carver, Massachusetts for a long time. Why is it in the zoning code? No one knows. It's ridiculous. The last one I have here is a phrase Shoup used to use: roughly right or precisely wrong. This Woodbury, Georgia is a very small town. It's mostly a cemetery, honestly, by square foot, I think. The hospital, look at this: 0.72 spaces per employee, 0.26 per student. Very precise, like there was some science here, but there's not. This tiny town has 2 parking requirements for helicopter land uses. A heliport requires 1 per 1,000 square feet. Helistop, 5 spaces total. What's the difference? Hell if I know. It's funny, but it is not a laughing matter. This is the DNA of our cities, and these parking requirements cause a lot of problems. They cause sprawl, they cause traffic, they cause the attendant pollution and traffic collisions from that. They lead to desolate kind of like stroads. They cause runoff and heat issues, environmental issues. We know that parking causes a lot in housing, right? And you can see this if you're lucky enough to find this is in College Park, the Iron Parts. When I visited there, these were 2 listings. Identical apartments. One is on the 1 floor above, and one is on 1 floor below. $31,000 difference in price. And the difference is that the one that costs $31,000 more has a dedicated parking space. So if you're lucky enough to see this, you can really see how much parking drives up the cost of housing. It's there. You rarely get to see it this starkly. There's other kinds of housing and other social issues that parking causes problems for. This is a story of a woman in Beaverton, Oregon, Melissa Bruce, who had adult foster care facility called Rooted Care Communities. These are facilities that are kind of like nursing homes, but they're more small. They're smaller. They're usually more affordable. My grandmother passed away in a facility like this. They're great for people on hospice or with memory issues. They can be closer to your house, so you can go visit your loved one easier. So Melissa Bruce had a 12-bedroom home, but she was only allowed to have 5 patients because the city zoning code said she needed 4 parking spaces. Now, these are patients that aren't driving, right? And she actually had 5 parking spaces on site, but 3 of them didn't count because they were stacked behind or they were in her garage. Now, Beaverton doesn't have parking requirements anymore, but it didn't come soon enough. Her business closed in 2023. And we have other stories. You can find in almost any community a story of a business that didn't start or closed because they couldn't expand or they couldn't make the numbers pencil. Parking is a disaster for traffic and transportation. Ironically, people say we have parking requirements to prevent congestion and traffic, and so if you have someone who wants to build a building and they don't have a lot of parking, the neighbors might say, "Hey, it's going to cause too much traffic." It's the opposite. Parking is more traffic. Every parking space is a car that you're expecting to come into your neighborhood. More traffic is bigger roads, which costs a lot of money. Bigger roads and more traffic lead to sprawl. That traffic means other modes like the bus are slower. Biking's more dangerous, so more people will drive, reinforces car dependency. More cars are more parking, and so on and so forth. It's a vicious cycle. Another big impact is water quality and how it expands. So we know that you build a parking lot, it rains, all that runoff goes into your rivers, lakes, and streams. And under the Clean Water Act, your cities aren't allowed to do that. So cities around the United States have built subway tunnels. We have one in Portland. This is an example of one in South Hartford, Connecticut. Subway-sized tunnels. We don't have a subway in Portland, but we have a subway-sized tunnel that when it rains, water comes off parking lots and then gets conveyed to the water treatment facility at a tremendous cost. This one cost $2 billion. I think Portland's cost $1 billion. If you don't do this, the water, which in many places that don't have a multi-billion-dollar conveyance system, a lot of times the water just goes into your rivers and streams and lakes, which is why the North Carolina bill I mentioned that would eliminate parking requirements statewide was sponsored by the Catawba River Keepers, right? It's a conservation issue. It's a climate change issue. We know that parking leads to more driving. If you have more parking at home, people drive more. Private transport emissions are the largest portion of transportation emissions in the United States. It's a climate issue. It's a public health and heating issue. This is a map of heating in an August day 10 years ago in Portland. This is a map that Ryan Martin, one of our previous interns, made that showed that this is kind of shocking just to say in itself that given Portland's reputation, if you map all the paved surfaces in Portland, 20% of it is parking, right? Like 20% of the city is parking lots, and that's Portland. And that includes, like, we have a big urban park, a forest. So it's kind of like that picture of Memphis, right? When you overlay those maps, you can see that the areas with a lot of parking are bright red. It makes sense, but a lot of people just don't think about this. They haven't considered what the actual impacts are. Another issue is just reinforcing car dependency and making people pay for things they don't want. And I'm going to address at the same time here. One of the most common concerns is what about people who are low income, or what about people who can't drive? What about old people? This book by Anna Zievarts, I can't recommend it enough. It really lays bare that in another argument would be this area, we can't get rid of parking requirements in my city or in this part of the city because there's no transit or it's hard to walk. Well, people are already living in those areas without cars now, and they're paying for that parking that you're requiring. And the parking that you're requiring is making it harder and more dangerous for them to live their lives. At any given time, 30% of the population on average doesn't have a driver's license. That includes children who still need to get around, older people who might lose their license, or I guess 30% don't have access to a car or can't drive because they might have a license and not be able to use it. They might be too low income or not have enough money to have a car. They might have lost their license due to legal issues. Many people with disabilities can't drive, and then many people who can drive with disabilities, it's difficult or they need special equipment. When you look at renter households, so there's a census data you can look at. I've done look this up for places that are car dependent all across the country. In Atlanta, 76% of renter households have access to one car or no car. So, but as we know, I think Atlanta actually requires 1.5 parking spaces per multifamily dwelling in much of the city. So you're having a parking tax. If you're a single parent and you want to have, and a lot of times these go up by bedroom. So if you're a single parent, you don't want to sleep in the same bedroom as your kid, you're going to pay a parking tax. Now, Atlanta is a city and it does have light rail, but if you go to the whole metro area, it's still 62% of the Atlanta metro people have access to one car or no cars that are renters. Um, I've looked at places like Orange County, Florida, where Orlando is. Same thing. More than 50% of the renter households have access to one car or no cars. So I've given you a lot of examples of problems that parking causes. And the good news is that you can make lemonade out of lemons here. There are many potential partners that you can use to engage, and these are all types of partners that we have engaged with that we've engaged with on parking reforms around the country. Um, the key here is, as you're organizing, you want to connect the issues to their concerns. So if their issue is climate change, you talk about that. If the issue is pollution, you could talk about that. They're also, you want to project a positive message about what can happen when you get rid of parking requirements and allay some of the fears. So the main thing that happens when you get rid of parking requirements is you can do more in the same space, right? You've seen a couple of these images. This is in Fayetteville, Arkansas. When they got rid of parking requirements for commercial uses in 2015, a lot of restaurants opened up. So I want to emphasize this is about choice. We're not about trying to social engineer. We're trying to offer more choices. Olive Garden and the Hibachi restaurant that exist in the same space as half of Fayetteville's downtown, they have extensive menu potentially. It's not a cheesecake factory, but they can't compete to the options you have outside. And the same thing goes for housing, right? We have two types of housing we build in this country, and there's a lot more options we can have. Another thing to emphasize is that it is, when you get rid of parking requirements, it doesn't change things overnight. It doesn't take away parking spaces. It's the same city. If someone already likes to drive, they can still drive. It's going to be a long time before the city heals, basically, and that you don't need not everyone, that these people may not feel like they need a car. And then when it does heal, they probably won't feel bad about getting rid of it. You're going to get less of what you don't want and a bit more of what you do want. In cities that got rid of parking requirements or reformed their residential requirements, Seattle and Buffalo, the new homes that were built with less parking, which means they would have been illegal prior to the reforms. But the majority of builders will still build parking in their buildings because they know that their customers need it. They just build a little less. It's incremental, it's marginal improvement. It's the key to missing middle things like ADUs and cottage court. You can legalize accessory dwelling units, grandmother units, or there's a number of number of terms for this, but they won't build them if you're requiring parking spaces. We have some other opportunities in our cities where we have big lots that are redevelopable. This is a lot in Rogers, Arkansas, that's as big as the downtown. I keep showing these because it's important to think about that. There are people, Monty Anderson in Texas takes these shopping centers and lays out plans to add housing, breaks up the big box development into more neighborhood style uses. So we can retrofit city centers into these parking into the kind of the scars of the parking requirements that we've inflicted. And one other thing, we can allow more homes in the place. We can allow more businesses to exist in the places where people live currently that might even be very suburban. If you look at a map of suburban America, there's not a lot of businesses in there. If you want to get your hair cut, you have to drive somewhere. We can allow people to open hair salons, but if you require parking, it's not going to happen. If you allow someone to open a coffee shop or a corner store in a neighborhood, if you're requiring a parking space for every 100 square feet, it's never going to open. This is about providing access in abundance. There's more ways to get around than just A to B transit, people driving or taking a train. That's great, but it's not always required. We can add more homes in places where people have access to jobs and commercial activity. And we can also add more commercial activity, as just mentioned, into places where we're in the suburbs by doing those shopping center retrofits or by adding ACUs. So I'm going to finish up with some messaging. This is a guidebook you can use from Parking Reform Network worked on with Sightline Institute and Welcoming Neighbors Network. It's a great resource. The main gist, my main takeaway from working on this progress to them, which was based on polling, is that people don't know enough about parking, and as long as you're talking in an engaging way and not being a jerk, you're going to make progress. What the surveys found was almost any message actually helps. Some messages help more than others. They found that talking about flexibility helped more than other messages. Talking about tangible harms, using specific, concrete, personal stories. Don't try and use language that triggers backlash that might be, controversial in your town, whatever that is. That's going to differ politically, but just be smart. Don't make it a referendum on cars or driving. We're not trying to change how people live. But talk about the benefits that you can get. Main Street preservation, trees. I also want to emphasize, don't like tree preservation is what I mean. Don't waste time. I'll get the question, how do I convince somebody who's against this? Don't waste time arguing with cranky opponents. Don't bother trying to convince someone necessarily. We know that 80%, some large percentage of the population has never considered this at a meaningful level. So go find someone who's not opposed to you and just get them to move a little bit further on the spectrum. And you can tip the scales that way, right? You can erode some opposition by telling people some facts, the cost, the space, the waste. And then you'll find a few people who are excited and they'll help support it. And you can tip the political viability easily or somewhat easily. Another question is data. Do you have data? We often get requests. Do you have an example of a city in, a coastal city with, this percentage of population, etc. Few people read research, fewer still understand it. And even if you give someone the exact same demographics of their city, unless it's literally about their city, they won't believe it. And probably even if it is about their city, I say stick with logic and a narrative. If you do need some research, there's a great paper by Shoup called The Pseudoscience of Parking Requirements. That's a good, just give that to your city staff and ask them to tell you why it's wrong. And Sightline Institute, especially the writings of Katie Gould, are fantastic. I can highly recommend them. So to sum it up, parking mandates are dumb. Parking's expensive. Parking takes up a lot of space. We can do a lot better than we're doing now. There's a lot of opportunities, and our cities will benefit when we do. So join us, and we can do this together. Please become a member. And I think we have a bit of time for Q&A, and you can always email me afterwards if you like. So that's my ABCs of parking requirements or parking reform.
Awesome.
Yay.
Always a fun presentation.
So do we have any questions?
Yes, we have two questions turning in the chat right now. First one is from John Levin, and he says, the future is self-driving autonomous vehicles and shared use. How do we plan for it and get there?
I largely agree, especially around shared use. It's somewhat controversial around the autonomous driving, but I've seen that technology here and I've used it. I think that we can plan for that. This is my advice is that use that narrative when it's applicable, right? I found I had a presentation I gave in 2018, I think, about autonomous vehicles and parking. And I said, when I got rid of my car, my family got rid of our car in 2008, and we had little kids, and people thought we were crazy. And then we had Zipcar, and then a little while later, Uber and Lyft showed up, and people then they didn't think it was as crazy to not have a car, but they saw that Uber and Lyft were a possibility for other people. And that actually, I think, helped a lot of that in the housing crisis. But just the existence of these ride-hailing services did make it more politically viable. People could understand that there were people who could get around without owning a car. The promise of autonomous vehicles is the same. It may not be here yet, and we actually don't want everyone to be driving around autonomous vehicles, but it does provide a narrative that these reforms are possible, and there is a better future. So I think that. To me, the preparation is, we'll have another talk at some point around AV politics, probably just in general. I think there's some reforms there, but allowing our cities, giving ourselves the chance to build cities that are more walkable is the solution. And so getting rid of parking mandates is like an essential reform to do that. It doesn't guarantee it, but your parking mandates will prevent a better city from coming along. I see Tom has a question here. Even if parking requirements are done away with, developers may not be able to get financing. Yes. How can local governments help? This is a great question. There's a lot. So this is we get a lot, and it's probably true. And it's not just the financiers, right? It's the financer. It might be the realtor that they're working with, or their broker tells them they need a certain amount of parking. The developer themselves might want to build parking. So the stars kind of have to align for this. The first thing local governments can do is, of course, just not require the parking, because if they are, they're not making it possible to do other options. Um, they can invest in mobility, right? The best thing I think a local government can do to help with the financing issue is make it actually truly viable to not own a car. So that, do the things that you need to do to make it so that a business actually can say, hey, you can encourage pilot projects. When Portland, it really kicked off the development with less parking when someone just tried it. So you can do things to try and attract an investor, to take a gamble, and if their business works, then others may follow. And then I think there's all sorts of ways that you can encourage smaller scale incremental development, right? The Incremental Development Alliance and other organizations like that, a small local business and smaller businesses and smaller developers are probably more likely to take a chance if they're allowed to regulatory wise. So you can encourage them, which is great too. I mean, I think most people prefer development that's more local, that's more smaller scale in a way. And so those would be some of my advice for that.
And would you like to add something?
Yeah, just so you keep saying remove parking minimums. Would parking maximums be a solution, and are parking maximums equally as made up as parking minimums?
Great question. I mean, they have to be, right? It's a number. So how do you decide? So I wouldn't oppose a parking maximum. Like, I wouldn't go testify against it, but we don't really push them. Partly because the strongest argument logically for parking requirement to eliminate them is that the number's made up. And so to switch and have another number is you're undermining yourself. And also it turns off folks who are interested in the issue for, economic liberty or property rights issues. Um, if there's it's difficult to have a number that makes sense. Many cities in the United States have maximums, and very few of them are binding, right? So I think that surgically in certain areas, right around a major transit investment, which is only common in some of our biggest cities, you might say, yeah, it really doesn't make sense to allow parking here because we've invested billions of dollars in subways, and building a parking lot on top is kind of criminal. Ironically, that's what we do, right? We build transit stations and we put parking lots all around them, but you could argue that. An approach that I think that is similar but slightly different would be to require the parking to be of a higher quality. So you don't require any parking, but you do require any parking that's built to be, have more permeable surfaces or water management, have more accessibility options, mitigate heating issues, to have more charging facilities, right? To be better landscaped, or to mitigate traffic concerns. So if you're building a garage, maybe you can require the garage to be convertible to an active use in the future. This is going to make it more adaptable. It's also going to cause the price to go up. And one of two things can happen then. The developer will either build less parking, or they're going to come to the city and say, hey, I need to build this parking because my bank's requiring me, but I can't make the thing convertible. It's going to cost too much. And then the city has an opportunity to negotiate in the same way they do now to reduce parking mandates, but now they're trying to just reduce the parking maximum. And it puts it in a much more aligned way where maybe you can get the developer say, look, sure, we'll let you build the garage without convertible requirement, but you're going to have to put some affordable housing in here, right? So it allows for that same kind of negotiation, but based more in a way that I think is in line with many of our city goals around affordability, traffic congestion, et cetera.
Thanks, Tony. Does anyone has any other question? You can also,
Just an overall question. For the cities that have either reduced or removed all parking mandates, what was the first domino to fall? Was it just motivated, city council members, or was it, lobbying by, townspeople? I just want to kind of understand, like, how you go about, insert, any random city, how you would go about trying to lobby them to remove or reduce parking mandates?
Um, it depends, right? I mean, it's shifting. So I would say like early on, well, almost always it does require a champion, right? Either in staff or in government, right? Someone with the authority to move things along. There's a few cases where maybe there's a mechanism where you can do a petition or a citizen petition thing and move something along, but that's not super duper common. So usually it's a city council person who starts asking questions or a coalition, someone gets elected. Um, it used to be things were much more incremental, right? They would start chipping away. We don't really recommend an incremental approach because it costs a lot of money every time you hire consultants. It costs political capital every time you adjust the zoning code. So getting it all done at once, and it's also just logically like none of the mandates make sense. So why even reduce them? You're just kind of giving them credence. So I think the key is convince a couple. Like, you need a champion inside, preferably someone in staff and in city council, and you get them start working together. And I mean, and a lot of it is just conversations and education. The role a person not in government can play is start a blog, right? Right. Like honestly, just talk about it. And to that point of the messaging, like people, when I got personally, when I first learned this, when I read Shoup's book, it blew my mind. And I started talking about it to people, and people at the city were like, "Don't talk about this. Like, no one wants to hear about this." And I was like, "I don't know, guys. Like, it's pretty crazy." And I think that like, not everyone wants to hear it, but if you approach this in an engaging way, people are not aware, and they are actually. It's one of those like eye-opening exchanges. So I think just the starting point is just education, and then a champion will probably lead it forward.
Got it. Very helpful. Thank you.
Um, I see Tom had another the state DOT question. That's a good one. I mean, I know one thing is like if your state DOT, like I'll use an example, which maybe is California, Caltrans, I believe has rules around VMT, right? Supporting changing, like rules around like so in California, I believe I might get this wrong, but I think that as cities upzone, which they're required to do, they have to mitigate their VMT, the addition of the vehicle miles traveled, the new trips and traffic that's going to cause. And one of the things that the DOT can do is provide guidance and encouragement and say that adding parking reforms, charging for parking on street or reducing mandates is a VMT reduction, and that can help. That's one example I know, but I would be curious to build less free, not to be glib, but build less highways is also probably a good way that a state DOT can help with parking reform is roads are very long driveways, and highways are the biggest driveways of all. So, that's probably the number one.
I'm actually kind of start trying to do something. Um, a member of the city council who's on our like transportation and infrastructure team just sent in like a thing telling the planning department to look over the zoning code for things that would be easily available to help improve how like our housing, help improve the amount of housing we're building. And I'm trying to meet with him specifically, and I plan on advocating specifically for like parking reform because I think that's probably like a really easily available thing.
Yeah. I mean, it's free, right? I mean, like you could, it's something that it's a great reform for a couple reasons. It doesn't, contrary to popular belief, it doesn't, I mean, as I showed on the slide, it doesn't change things overnight. So usually, politically it might be hard running up, but it doesn't really lead to, a bunch of, it doesn't lead to immediate changes as opposed to like charging for parking might do. But yeah, it doesn't cost the city anything to eliminate their parking mandates, and then the worst case scenario, you get the same amount of stuff as you did before, but in the basic case scenario, you get more housing. And I think that's really one of the things I've thought about. This is an interesting thing I've said before, or I've thought about is imagine, if, and to the point of like the question around the banks requiring parking anyway. even if every apartment building that's been built in the United States since 1970 had just 3 to 5 more apartments in it, right? Like just imagine 3 to 5 more homes in every apartment building that was built. Um, that's a tremendous amount of housing, and that very easily, without parking requirements, would be built. Developers, architects, builders will often, the constraint to how much housing they're putting in the building is not the height requirement for the property they're on. It's the parking. They run out of space for parking. So removing that limitation immediately means that the next building that goes in is probably just going to have a couple extra apartments, and they're going to be the cost to build them is marginally much less. And so, and we know an apartment with not a guaranteed parking space, no one's going to rent that for the same price that they would with a parking space. So it's not like it's going to drive the price extremely down, but it just logically is the case that an apartment with no parking amenity is going to cost less than one with a parking amenity. So if you're allowed to unbundle. So yeah, hopefully that helped. Oh yeah, I was wondering because I saw your name on here is
Oh, no,
Aspen.
that's just my name. I'm in Cincinnati, Ohio,
Ah,
actually.
okay, great. Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
As an example for Cincinnati, I'll just say an effective messaging is to talk about the places that currently exist that are kind of like amazing. So over the Rhine in Cincinnati, amazing neighborhood would not have been possible to build with parking requirements. And so the places that we love the most, um, can't be built with the mandates. And there's a shirt that Better Block has that says it's hard to build. It's hard to find parking in great spaces, and I think that's a great way to think about it. Is you can really point to places where people like to be.
Thanks. I'm just going to then wrap up the session. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Yay. Thanks for the thumbs up, John. I'm glad you like it. Yay. Okay, so thank you so much for being with us today. I just want to remind you all that if you're not part of our community, join us. Dina will help by pasting the links in the chat as well. And RSVP to our upcoming events. Join us. And we also have a small feedback form. So if you have any other idea of another event that you would like to see or any other speaker that you would like to see featured in PRN, please leave it them there. It's a 1-minute feedback form and we love to hear from you. So thank you so much. I encourage everyone to mute yourselves and say bye-bye while we close the session.